Hey everyone, Dr. Frunkey here with an exciting new knife consult for you. In front of us is the Arcform Slimfoot. This is a very interesting design that comes to us by way of a new company called Arcform, but it's also designed by Jeff Blauvelt of Tough Knives. So Jeff Blauvelt is a custom knife maker. If you'll recall, a few weeks ago I had his full custom Dark Knight collaboration with Elijah Isham on my channel. I'll just bring it out so you can see it. You see the Tough Knives logo on there. So Jeff is definitely one of the better designers out there. I absolutely adore most of his designs. And the Slimfoot is really no exception. He makes a custom Slimfoot. It looks a little bit different than this. Right now he's in the process of making a run of custom knives called the Nakiri that also looks very similar to this with this fuller and everything. So definitely an interesting design, and I think that this knife has really captured the interest of a large portion of the knife market right now because of its unique design, because of its newness, and because of the fact that it's designed by Tough Knives. So I'm clean that little spot off for you. So I wanted to get into the details of this knife and start to explain kind of my thoughts and see if you like it at the end of the video here. So bringing out the ruler, overall you're looking at right at about 8 inches of overall length. The blade itself is about 3 1/4 inches of cutting length and just over, maybe right at about 3 1/2 inches back to the handle right there, 4 inches back to the pivot. We talked about the overall length at 8 inches, 4 1/2 inch handle with about 3.75 inches of overall handle length. So a reasonable size for EDC. The handle thickness in the pocket is just over 0.5 inches, and the blade stock you're looking at 0.15 inches right there. So a chunky little knife right here, but a nice overall EDC size. Let's go ahead and bring out a couple of other reasonable knives here for size comparison. Here's a Spyderco Paramilitary 2. So overall profile is relatively similar right there. Here is a Mannix 2, also from Spyderco. Some relatively common knives that people might know about. How about we bring out Shirogorov F3, a bigger knife right there. And last but not least, I'll bring out my other Riot knife, my David Mosier and Sean Kendrick Hybrid Moment collaboration right there. That's a smaller knife at a about a 3-inch blade on that one. So looking at this knife, it looks like it's going to function pretty well. I think that everyone thinks that this Wharncliffe is going to be really nice, and a lot of people have picked this up. I want to give a shout out to my buddy Tony Meter for sending this guy along so that I could review it. So let's break this knife down anatomically and see what we're working with. This is up front that 3 1/2 inch blade with a 3.25 inch cutting length of S35 VN steel. It's done in a hollow grind with a very interesting Wharncliffe or almost sheep's foot type grind. It's done in a nice stone wash, and the flats are actually done in a satin. And Riot Knives, who builds this knife, actually, I don't know if I mentioned that before, does a nice hand rub satin when you see this satin finish on there, so you know that it's some quality. So that's a pretty nice blade. It's a very unique shape, and it's got this fuller that runs down the length of the blade. Now, while that's an interesting design choice, I don't know that that's really a perfect functional choice. Fullers are, in essence, they're called blood grooves, and they're made for knives so that when you stab them into something, that you can pull the knife back out easily, that it allows for that vacuum phenomenon to not happen. It allows places for the gas to travel through so that you can pull the blade out of whatever person or animal you've stabbed this into. But this is not a stabbing knife. This is a sheep's foot knife, and so that seems a little bit strange to me. This knife is going to be used primarily for cutting and slicing like this, in which case this fuller is just going to get full of stuff. And then, secondarily, one of the nice things about having fullers sometimes on these newer knives, I'll bring out my BBM for an example, is that you can actually get your finger in there away from the hole that's intended to open, and you can open the knife by just pushing on that fuller, much like it's a deployment method. But on this knife, I will tell you, there is no way that I'm getting this thing open by spider flicking that knife. I'm just going to tear my finger up by doing that. the detent is strong enough that that's not going to happen. So that's a bit odd to me. And it doesn't function either as a thumb deployment mechanism in any real way. So a bit of an odd choice in terms of that. It's more of a form before function kind of a thing right there. That bothers me a little bit. Secondarily, when the blade is closed, and this is a Shabazism right here, but I want you to notice how close that blade is to the back of the handle right there. And it's a bit unusual in terms of how wide these scales are spaced apart. I'll bring out a couple of other knives just for a comparison. This is a 0801 by ZT. It's a slightly narrower gap right there. Here's a Kaiser Mjolnir. Kind of a bigger gap on that one. That may be a bad example, but most knives are a little bit more narrow in terms of the gap between the scales right there. And so that even that couple of millimeters means that I can actually feel the blade right there underneath. And I had a couple of people when I was posting these pictures on Instagram tell me that they had sliced themselves pretty badly on this. So sort of a dangerous thing. A couple of design element flaws already going on here. So the blade itself is okay. It slices all right. It's got a hollow grind, which I think helps it a lot. If it had been a flat grind, it would have been completely worthless. It's not really the best slicer. It really isn't. It's a rather thick stock, and it didn't cut all that well. The blade edge is okay, but I didn't go to this knife for trying to cut anything. It just didn't really work quite as well as most of the other ones. So that's a bit of a disappointment considering knives need to be able to cut well. Moving back to the pivot and deployment, it's got a flipper-only deployment mechanism as we discussed. And the action is quite nice. The detent is very strong, so the knife does deploy very well. I actually like the way that the flipper is done on this knife. It's rather subtle rather than a large sort of protuberance right there. It's a nice rounded thing. And you get a nice grip on it with your finger with that jimping, and it's pretty easy to deploy the knife and comfortable. It goes either, it's mostly just a light switch mechanism right there, so easy to deploy, very comfortable to do that all day long, super easy to disengage the lock, and a nice smooth ball bearing pivot. It's got a rather simple pivot screw on it, nothing to really complain about there. I kind of like that. It's simple, it's plain, but it's got a little bit of artistic flair to it, so can't complain there too much. Moving back to the handles, we've got slabs of 6AL4V titanium in true Riyadh fashion. These are really nicely done. Nice chamfering going on, and obviously up front you've got this piece of nicely done carbon fiber. This looks like a maybe 2x2 twill regular carbon fiber, but it's beautifully done. I'll show you some detailed shots here. Beautifully, beautifully done. No voids in the carbon fiber, no mistakes in the milling of any kind. Nice chamfered angles everywhere. They fixed this to the front with a couple of black screws. I might have liked to see hidden hardware or had it screwed in from the back. I think that's just one of those choices that somebody's got to make somewhere along the line. Maybe it's cheaper to manufacture it like that. But I will say there's no perceptible gap between the titanium and the carbon fiber at any point, and so it's beautifully done. The bag spacer is a bit interesting to me again. This sort of linear pattern right here is not replicated anywhere else on the knife, so that design is just a bit unusual to me. I'm sort of I like to see design flow and philosophy, and I don't see that anywhere else on the knife, so it's a bit peculiar to me. It's got a nice clip. This works very well. They've done the smart thing of putting this more or less away from the lock bar cutout, so it's not always getting hung up on there. Speaking of the lock bar cutout, that is an absolutely awesome milling pattern. I really like to see that done with some flair. I get a little bit tired of a lot of knives that just come with these sort of plain cutouts like that, and so I like to see somebody adding that design element to it. So I do like that. So, what do I think of this knife and how does it carry? Well, it carries okay. It's slim in the pocket because it's narrow in this dimension, and the clip works quite well. But in terms of everyday carry, it doesn't particularly cut all that well. And there are a couple of other issues with regards to the way that you have to be careful not to cut yourself there. And to me, the design is just sort of questionable at many, many places. This is really just a knife that's designed for form, Arcform, and it's a very unusual knife to premiere your company with. So I think that they should have gone with a more traditional knife. I'll be interested to see what Jeff comes up with for his next design and what comes out of Arcform. What I can tell you is this is very well made, and so whatever they make is going to be nicely done through Riot, so we'll look forward to the next knife. Go ahead and click like and subscribe to my channel here, guys, on YouTube, and as always, take care.